All panelists need to be back on screen, please. Good evening and welcome. We're delighted that you're taking the time to attend this webinar that is being put on by the Desert Southwest Conference, United Methodist Church, Board of Church and Societies, Economic Inequality team. Tonight is going to be a lively discussion, I promise you. We're going to be talking about economic inequality and criminal justice. These two topics are inextricably linked, and they affect the vulnerable populations throughout our nations, and certainly here in Arizona and in Southern Nevada. Tonight's panelists will be discussing the various implications and how we can help as people of faith trying to make a difference for those who are affected by these injustices. Now I would like to introduce the chair of the Economic Inequality Task Force, Bud Clark. Bud, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Billy. Okay, so we have this is our third webinar on these subjects between these injustices and the economic inequality problems. And tonight, again, we have a panel of three outstanding individuals that really know where we're coming from. So it's going to be fun. We'll ask them a list of questions. We have quite a few, and they'll take turns, and each one of them can respond as much as they'd like. And till we get all the way through, then we'll have a final question that we can discuss. We want to be done at the time at 8 o'clock, so we'll work for that. So I'll introduce our panel. I'll start with how they're on my screen here. And the first is Gerald Williams. He is HEAT Program Coordinator for the Pima County Criminal Justice Reform Unit. He's worked with AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, for several years on reframing justice work here in Tucson, is where he's from. Also, he's an active member of his church and a community leader. He's a certified peer support specialist and recovery coach. By the way, he's a single father of 6 children. He was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and is a nice young 49 years young. Okay, Khalil Rustan is a on-the-ground mentor and resource for both Arizona Justice Project clients and hundreds of formerly incarcerated individuals through the SAGE counseling program. Members of both the legal community and the private sector look to Rustan as a leader who brings real-time solutions to the community that helps empower individuals by rebuilding their lives upon release from incarceration. And Rustan has lived this injustice, so believe him. Our third panelist is our own Paul Bullis. He's chair of our criminal justice task force, and he's a retired attorney. He has spent his career in public service. He began at legal aid and spent the rest of his career working for the state of Arizona and the federal government. Paul has long been active in social justice issues, including refugee immigrant issues and prison reform. He's dedicated to the whole cause of correcting injustice in our society. And he's a great guy. So I will begin with our questions. And again, we'll start with the left side of my screen is Gerald. And the first question is, how does the criminal justice system affect economic inequality in society, or the reverse? Gerald?
I would say the criminal justice system affects everything, because once you have that record, it's like you're marked for life. if we don't do anything to seal the record, to be able to give the individual that is trying to find gainful employment the ability to be able to not only fill out the application and feel comfortable that they are not underqualified, but just qualified all of their merit, then we are basically putting them behind the 8 ball. It's like sometimes when you're sentenced for a minor offense, you'll be serving a life sentence because you have a felony record. And as African Americans, you know, it's hard to be able to have the confidence to go into a place and fill out the application and feel equal and thinking that you're going to come out of the job with a good chance. I know that several states, they are doing things that are squashing records and sealing records so that it will be more equitable for the individual to not only get a job, but just to get housing as well. All that plays a part in everything that we do in everyday life. I'm a formerly incarcerated individual, so I had to go through the steps that I know that other individuals will be going through or are going through, and being turned down for the job because you have a record, or not being able to get housing because you have a record. All of those things carry with you for the rest of your life. And that is something that I know as a society that we are able to try to reverse. Hopefully here soon in Arizona, we'll be able to take something to legislation to be able to assist individuals that are reintegrating back into society. And that will close things for those that have low level offenses and things of that nature. So it plays a heavy part.
Khalil?
Yes. So, you know, mass incarceration, or those drivers of mass incarceration, have been, you know, a real fuel for economic inequality. You know, to add on what Gerald was saying, and thank you, Gerald, for pointing that out. That was beautifully, you know, or articulately put out there, because most people don't know what those driving forces are. And when you look at wealth gaps, so, you know, African Americans, Blacks are disproportionately affected by these wealth gaps. You know, and this has been how it has been for decades, disconnected from the real economy. So even when the economy is booming, that wealth does not reach or encompass the Black community. So, you know, most people go into survival mode, you know, whether it's just to put food on the table, or trying to get their kids into school. You know, all of these things impact economic inequalities. And, you know, now you get to the pandemic. And on top of that pandemic, there was already a recession predicted for 2020 before the pandemic even happened. So now how does that affect the Black community and other communities of color who were never connected to the overall economy in the first place? So one of the biggest problems is we start to see the marginalized being more marginalized, and all of these stimulus checks and these stimulus packets, it's like trying to put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. You know, we're going to give you $1,400, or, you know, when you look at, or when you break down the stimulus, the whole package, the $1.9 trillion stimulus package that was passed, but how much of that actually went into the hands of the most marginalized communities? Because I'm saying, okay, you really want to do a stimulus packet, you could give every, you know, minority person or low income person $100,000 each, and you will still come out far less, you know, as to what they're investing in banks and to all this other all these other companies who are receiving that stimulus. You can give these people $1 million and you would still come out far less and empower the community. So I say this because there is so much connected to wealth gaps and then the rise in crime, because lawmakers will then create laws to criminalize people who are actually surviving. That's the saddest piece of all of this. So I'll stop there.
Paul?
Thank you, Khalil and Gerald. I want to build on the comments that you raised, which were just excellent and right on point. But I want to start with one of the comments that Billy made at the beginning, which is that all these issues are inextricably interrelated. That's exactly right. They're inextricably interrelated. They build on each other. They're cyclical. And in particular, you kind of start with the knowledge that low wealth poverty is itself associated with an increase in imprisonment. So, and we'll see that imprisonment also leads to less wealth. So, it's a cycle, and it keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Gerald mentioned that some of these issues stay with you for the rest of your life. Again, that's exactly right. And one of the things that imprisonment does is it reduces an individual's earning power. And over the course of a life, that could be $400,000 or $500,000. And every year, that's dollars not only taken out of an individual's pocket and their family's pocket, but also taken out of the economy. And Khalil mentioned the wealth gap and an increasing wealth gap, and that's exactly right. As you look at the reduction in earning power for African Americans and other minorities, that they lose more earning power than whites and Caucasians in the same situation. Even whites who have been through prison, minorities will still have less learning power going forward. So to follow up on what Khalil said, yeah, that increases the wealth gap, going forward, really through the rest of people's lives. And that loss of wealth increases the probability, the possibility of imprisonment, which just precipitates the cycle. Very, very difficult to get out of. I think both Khalil and Gerald mentioned employment. Of course, it's really, really difficult to become to get employed, having been released. And I think Gerald, you mentioned having to mention a prison record or a criminal record, and how that might just get somebody disqualified from the beginning before they even get to the merits. So the question of can some records be expunged or sealed, or can there be a banning the box law that says people don't have to disclose that right away, so that employers can actually get to the merits of an individual and evaluate that. So that's a huge issue out there to get people back into the working economy. Homelessness is another huge issue that also exacerbates losses of income and increases poverty. People who have been in prison just once experience homelessness at a rate nearly 7 times higher than the general public. They've been incarcerated more than once. They have a homeless rate 13 times greater than the general population. So, and homelessness leads to all kinds of issues, and certainly makes getting services, health services, medical services, jobs much more difficult. Again, driving towards poverty. So, and yeah, as I said, these just build upon each other. They're cyclical. There are a lot of other issues we'll need to be talking about tonight, but But this is really, really a difficult situation once you get in that cycle to be able to break out of it. Otherwise, it just seems to continue to go down.
And listening to the three of you, as someone who teaches leadership out at Perryville Women's Prison, we can't forget that everything you all just said also affects the family and leads to the breakdown of the family, leads to breakdown of relationships in my world, because I'm at Perryville, which is a women's prison, the breakdown between the moms and the children. And I've heard heartbreaking stories. Gentlemen, we do already have a question in the chat, and I would invite our attendees to feel free to post questions in the chat. That question is, it is my understanding that even having a misdemeanor is often an automatic disqualification for an entry-level job and renting an apartment, let alone a house. Is this correct? Any comment? And that is from Yvonne Harrison. Who'd like to comment on that?
I can take that, because I also want to address something Paul said too, real quick. So it's supposed to be a case-by-case basis. Misdemeanors show up, and even arrests, even where there's no disposition, these third-party vendors who are doing background checks, a lot of their records are not accurate, or they will push forward an arrest where there was no conviction, and that's showing. And what we're dealing with is a culture of punishment by a lot of these property management companies, because a lot of it is their internal policies. Now, and that's a case-by-case basis. I've seen where people were able to get in with felonies, and then I've seen where a lot of people were denied, more denied than not. But then also there's this misconception about band-a-box. Here in Arizona, that means nothing, okay? Right. It's a talking point. It's a smoke screen, because band-a-box legislation, first off, it's not mandated in the private sector, whether housing, whether employment, it's not mandated. Most of your band-a-box in Arizona are government entities who change their policies to hire on people with felonies, which are most likely going to just become labor for the state. You get what I'm saying? So it's not like they were intending to empower those people who have criminal backgrounds. It was to utilize the labor. So of course they changed their policies, but majority of our economy has grown over the last decade through the private sector, where all the jobs have been created. Here in the state, they're still going to do a background check. So the band-a-box is a smokescreen.
Khalil, someone in the chat had just asked you to explain what is band-a-box.
So band-a-box was policies or legislation, and it's a national effort to remove the question of whether have you been convicted of a felony from employment applications. Okay, now band-a-box legislation, it changes from state to state, because some states utilize it as a way to expunge. You have states who expunge. Arizona, there are no expungement laws outside of the new 207 that passed, which will expunge marijuana convictions. Outside of that, we've heard that term, they do restoration clinics where they, oh boy, I'm going blank on it. But there is no expungements. When you go in front of a judge, to restore your civil rights, your record is not being expunged or sealed. You see what I'm saying? Arizona has no expungement outside of the marijuana.
And even with the marijuana, they're only going to go for a certain amount.
For a short amount.
And then, right. And they have this thing called a set aside, where you can get certain things set aside where you've been released for a certain amount of years. And they still don't do that right away. It's, as we all know, that Arizona is one of the states that we still spending, I think, 1 billion per year on incarceration. We still have private prisons here. And I don't want to skip ahead to a lot of questions, because If you ask me, a lot of the legislation that we have been working on and trying to pass with AFSC, the reason why it didn't pass is because of the private prison contract that we have here. The contract is something that I've been trying to look into to find out when will it end. We signed the contract, and based upon that contract, they are obligated to have people in those beds, and it's $1 billion industry. And it's something that it's very, very sad, because I think we are one of the only 3 states that's still doing 85% of the time inside the walls. We've been working on trying to get early earned release credits to where people be able to do 65% of their time. Those are things that we're still fighting for and trying to get done. Now, I don't know exactly where we're standing right now as far as the bills, but we have written up a lot of legislation and a lot of bills that were very, very, very good, and that would have been retroactive to release people to their family. It costs more to keep a person in prison than it does to send a person to college. And in prison, you're not rehabilitating. You're only becoming a better criminal. It's something that it's just an industry that we have become so used to here in Arizona. And because it creates so many jobs, I have been talking to my boss and trying to implore them to see what we can do to prepare to close down some of the prisons and bring more employment here to Arizona. We have Amazon opening up a lot of more things here that's going to create some jobs. But when you look at it in $1 billion industry, the prison is like, okay, when every year we do a Reframing Justice Day. So we're spending they're saying, okay, let them waste their hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars trying to pass the bill. But you have the telephone companies, the people that are selling the canteen and things of that nature. Then you have the private prison that's making the money off the body. That is driving force behind, like, okay, we're not going to pass. We'll put the bill on. It'll make it to the House, but we're going to shoot it down. It's been like that since 2000, ever since I've been working with AFSC. And it's something that is very discouraging, because you really have to look at a lot of the people that are in prison right now are there for drug addictions. And those addictions could be solved and worked with programs. And as we continue to move forward with the criminal justice reform and prison reform, that is a lot of the things that we're hopefully trying to establish here in Arizona, in Pima County, and throughout the state, to put people in program, because the addiction is not a crime. When you look at it more and more now, that you have more state officials and doctors and lawyers and anybody with a high-paying job, their family member or them themselves have been addicted to something. So as you look at it, it is they're looking and seeing that you just can't put a person on the bed, because when you send a person to prison, you're pretty much just preserving them. And like I said, they're not in there being able to rehabilitate, because you have to have a certain amount of time to be able to do the program. So 9 times out of 10, you have people that don't even want a program, because they're like, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to go back out, and I'm going to do this anyway. So we're not really either creating a dent in the problem. We're just continuing to add to it because of the private prison contract that we have here in Arizona. And I think that's why they use and try to hide all of these things as far as the ban in the box. Like you say, we have it here, but it's not utilized to where it should be. And right now, working with Second Chance, and we're trying to restart something else here called Fresh Start, so we can get people's record expunged. Trying to hopefully we'll be able to this next go around with Reframing Justice Day in 2022 to be able to have something to where we can put in legislation's face that, hey, certainly the individuals, those that are not charged with capital murder, or those that haven't done murder, or those who are charged with sex crimes, we understand that how that is and things of that nature. Some people may not be eligible to get the expungement, but those are with the low level offenses, 3 to 5 years, or the B&Es, the breaking and entering, those crimes, especially if they serve their time, we should be able to expunge something to where they're not carrying that sentence for the rest of their life, and they're able to go and be productive citizens and be able to provide for their families.
Okay, so we're gonna cover some of this more with questions coming up, like how does the private system work? We'll continue with that. I know my wife has been a pen pal with a lady in Perryville, and it's an eye opener. It's something they became quite close, you know. So, and she just got out last week, and we're very hopeful that she's got some programs going now. So there's some good things happening. Okay. Oh, and by the way, I was corrected. This goes till 8:30, right? Okay, not 8 o'clock. So we have a little more time than I was saying. Next question. What does the data tell us about who is in our prisons?
I'm not privy to the data. I don't have it in front of me, but I do know that we all know that African Americans and minorities are disproportionately affected by the incarceration rate compared to our white and Caucasian counterparts. And we are, like I say, we're there in a higher rate because we are not able to afford an attorney, and we're not equipped to knowing what the laws and what things carry. So, you know, sometimes a person that doesn't know the law will be coerced to sign, okay, hey, just go on and do this time. So that is what's really taking effect as far as the incarceration rate on the African American side. But I wish I had the data in front of me to really be able to speak to it. But I mean, it's not only here in Arizona, but around the United States. We are, I think, maybe 4-1. If you ask me, I think it's somewhere up in there. But I will let Paul or Khalil speak to that. But I do know that we are, as minorities and Blacks, are very, very highly represented in the not only prison, but in county jails.
The information that I have is that Black Americans make up 40% of the incarcerated population in the United States, and that includes federal prisons, state prisons, as well as jails. Whereas 40% of the incarcerated population, but only 13% of the United States population. Latinos make up 19% of the incarcerated population, 16% of the US population, and whites make up 39% of the incarcerated population, but 64% of the entire population. So you're exactly right. There is that huge disparity between minorities representation among the incarcerated population.
Paul, do you have the figures for Indigenous people?
I don't have it nationally. In Arizona, Indigenous people make up 5.4% of the incarcerated population, and their representation in the state is about 3.9%. African Americans are 15% of the state incarcerated population compared to about 4.5% in the overall population. Hispanic, about 38.5% of the incarcerated population, and about 28% of the overall population, and whites about 39% incarcerated, and about 54% of the overall population. So again, a lot of disparity between what you see in the prisons and jails and in the rest of the population.
Yeah, and I was just going to run over those numbers. And as far as the race and ethnicity in the jails, it's pretty much the same. African Americans making up 5%. However, 18% of the jail population, Native or Indigenous, 4% of the state population, 7% of the jail population, Latinos, 31% of the state population, 24% of the jail population. And this was as of 2016, what I've been looking at. And then, you know, the white counterpart, 56% of the state population, 43% of the jail population, and then our Asian or Pacific Islanders making up 4% of the state population, 1% of the jail population. And that's pretty much the same as of 2017 for the prison population. So, you know, we can most definitely state that there are you know, people of color are disproportionately incarcerated at a higher rate. Also, I don't have it with me, but I will look for the link or do some follow-up. But, you know, at the ACLU, we also put together a very good report that laid out the racial prosecutions by Maricopa County Attorney's Office. So, you know, we asked for data over the years, and it was finally given to the ACLU. We were then able to look at the data and put it into a report showing that, you know, so a lot of these charges were racially motivated. So it's not alarming to me that we are disproportionately or communities of color are disproportionately incarcerated. And then even with, you know, I say this because when we talk about incarceration, and if we're going to end those drivers, we also have to look at low income white or Caucasian individuals who are also thrown in this mix, you know. So, you know, I think that population right there, you know, we talk about communities of color and low income, you know, poor people overall who are making up these systems.
And that kind of goes to the next question too, and that how does a person's economic status affect arrests, charges, and sentencing? And we know that someone that has money and is white particularly is generally going to get a lot lighter sentence than the rest of us. So that's the question. How does a person's economic status affect arrests?
But before I answer, I just want to follow up on Billy's comment about families who are incarcerated, and because that's a huge thing that we have to remember, that more than half of both the men and women that are incarcerated throughout the country are parents, and almost 60% of the children of these incarcerated parents are under 10 years of age. So, separating, be it a father or a mother, from a young child can really be devastating to that relationship and family connections and all that. So that's a real critical part that we need to be aware of. In the question about how does economic status affect the length of sentences, it is, the only comment I want to make about that is, goes back to what I said earlier, that these things just build on each other, all these issues. And I can't remember who mentioned the issue about not having an attorney and while you're being incarcerated. So that raises a lot of issues. One is the use of bail for keeping people incarcerated, which separates them from their families, from resources, and increases the pressure on them to want to plead guilty to a crime just to get out of incarceration sooner. And there's money that's been taken away, from public defenders' offices, in Arizona over the last several years, and nationwide as well. So not having access to those resources. So people are pressured to and will plead guilty. So for whatever reason, guilt or not, but to move on with their lives. Well, that's another record for them, another conviction. And as those pile up, okay, now you can enhance sentencing, you can enhance charges because someone has got a record. So that's going to build on and increase the length of sentences over time. So again, that's just another example of how things build upon each other and results in this type of situation in long sentences.
I'm gonna pitch a curveball here when we talk about the economic status of an individual. I don't like, in this, I've had this conversation before. Some people may not like it, but it's a reality. I think once you get entangled in the system, it really doesn't matter about your economic status. I think your economic status, it happens prior. Like people who get off of crimes because they have money is because they have relationships prior to entering the system to where somebody's pulling strings. I say that because the curveball is, there's a thin line between implicit bias and racism. So where some people are not racist, but they may say, well, I just think that certain people from a different community or certain community are problematic or they're criminal, they have this label. So I want to say that those charging decisions come from racism or implicit bias, because I've seen a lot of African-American brothers who got money still go to prison, get railroaded. So I want to just point that out in the curveball, because we cannot move away from the most powerful individual in the system are prosecutors and how they decide to prosecute the case. So when you see individuals who enter the system who have money, that's usually coming because somebody's pulling that string to where now there's an inequality when it comes to justice, exactly. There's a conflict of interest before an individual because, hey, that's Steve's son. I know Steve. I went to law school with Steve. Hey, pull some strings. Okay, so now where most of communities of color, whether they have money or not, will go to prison, Steve gets an opportunity to go into a diversion program. And he has a undesignated class 6 to where if he completes that program, then guess what? That's a real tricky way to expunge somebody's record. You get what I'm saying? Because that felony will drop off their record. Now, I say that because I don't, going back to the original question, the economic status and the treatment, I think is more on who has these relationships and who's in certain people's circle prior to entering the system. And then once they get into the system, they're protected.
I concur with both of you all because it can, like you said, it's a curveball and it can go either way. And we also know, just to put a picture on what you were saying, an individual, I forgot what state it was in, but he was a Caucasian male, and he raped a young lady. I think she was passed out. And the judge, I forgot what the sentence that he gave him, but I know that it wasn't nothing that anybody else would get. And because and his factor on his sentencing was because he said, I don't want this to hold you back or be or be on your record. And I mean, the man, he gave him a misdemeanor charge for raping a lady that was unconscious. And because now just with that sentencing, we had to know that he had someone in that inner circle of that judge. And not only did he have the complexion for the connection, but his connection outside of that, outside of his complexion, it played a factor in that light sentence. And all of these things are still true and reign true today. So they both hit it right on the head. It can go either way. But in the African American community, when your back is against the wall, you look at things and then you're like, okay, I'm trying to get a job. I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do that. That's what drives a lot of the factors of the crazy thinking for people to commit a crime. So, you know, and then when you commit the crime, you're sitting behind the walls and not with the proper representation to help you get out of that. So all of these things play a factor. Your economic status plays a factor when you're out doing the wrong thing or when you get caught for doing the wrong thing.
I have a quick question. It came to my attention that particularly at the county attorney's office, that the DAs, the young attorneys, got more money if they got higher charges and more charges against people. Do you know if that's still happening?
I can't speak to that, but one thing I do know, and it still to this day drives me crazy, because a public defender went to the same law school as a paid lawyer went to. Okay. So when you have public defenders, they shoot for pleas. That's one thing that really upsets me, because you're first of all, you signed up to be a public defender, and if not, then you're working your way up the chain to be private law. But you signed on to represent someone to the best of your ability. And what they do and what they practice is they get more pleas than a trial. And that's something that is very, very disturbing, because like I say, being system involved and going through the system and being in there for 10 plus years, I was able to kind of become a sort of a jailhouse lawyer when I was in the county jail, when I could, people would come in and I'm like, okay, what you're in here for? And then I'm like, okay, we're looking at the mitigated sentence. And if you have priors, don't accept the first plea or things of that nature, when a public defender will coerce them. Hey, why don't you take this to get it out the way? So when you look at that, you have to say the public defender and the DA are in hoops, because that is your system. If you ask me, that is the system. That's been the system. And like I say, a paid lawyer, they all study the same law, and a paid lawyer will go and research casework to be able to go back to the judge or fight the prosecutor on statutes and things of that nature to plead the crime down, when your public defender should be able to do that as well. So I don't know if they're still holding true, getting more money on getting a conviction, but I do know that there are things within the system that has to change, and it's night and day, because you can't tell me that it isn't, because when you go look at the data and you do research, you can just see if this person had a private lawyer, if this person had a public defender, and I know, because like I said, I was on that before. I've been tried with a public defender before and was able to have a lawyer before. So it's just a blessing and a curse.
So to jump in on that real quick too, I'm just going to say there's bad attorneys across the board. If it doesn't matter where they land. Because I know some damn good public defenders throughout the state and across the country. However, they're motivated. They're and I know some attorneys paid that sold their clients out because of their ethics. There's been attorneys charged for ethics violations. And I want to say this because the problem goes back, when you look at the budget for your county attorneys, those budgets are overinflated compared to what your public defender's offices are getting. Now, the other part of that too is, you figured more money should be allocated to represent your freedoms than to actually take them away. And where it becomes a problem is charging decisions. Most of these attorneys, and I was looking at a lot of cases, they put a defendant in an awkward position to where they overcharge. And when they overcharge you, it's not about, we have people taking pleas who didn't actually commit crimes, because it's what could actually be proven at trial. You see what I'm saying? And so, you have attorneys that will advise their client, of the facts that, hey, I can't get you off. Like, this could go either way. And if it's a high probability of you getting convicted, then, you do have some lazy attorneys that try to push those pleas without even having all the facts.
Mhm.
However, there are attorneys that push those pleas because the state has overcharged you. They've strategically overcharged you to psychologically coerce you into taking a plea. They put the defendant at a disadvantage. So I don't think that, I think it's more about a conviction rate, which there is always this rumor that, you know, the state of Arizona or prosecutions look at about a 98% conviction rate. And I think more of the incentive comes into some of the work that AFSC did that I love, was how they connected the Arizona retirement system to stock in private prisons. Okay. And I want to say this too, because most people may not understand, you have a private system here in the state. Okay. Now the state contracts out about 6 of those private facilities to house Arizona, those who have been convicted of crimes in Arizona. Now there's other private prisons that house individuals who have been convicted in other states. Then you have private prisons who house individuals on immigration or federal detention, okay? Now, when you get to the state prisons, to me, those state prisons have become a shell because of the numerous privatized services. You see what I'm saying? So your commissary, your, like Gerald was saying, your commissary, your phones, your healthcare, all of that has been privatized. So they're making tons of money in the state prison, which they shouldn't be making. And then even in some instances, they're double dipping because taxpayers pay for individuals' clothes. However, they force individuals to rebuy those clothes on commissary. So I say this because, you know, there is a conflict of interest overall within our justice system, and I can't just narrow it down to prosecutors. You know, I mean, that would be the biggest scandal. Some people would say since the moon landed, but no, I'm saying that there is something seriously going wrong, and there is a conflict when it comes to the justice system and people making money off the system. It's no longer a justice system.
I'm sorry, I overstepped here and asked this another question. So, and we're back on private prisons. We're going to have a lot to talk about, obviously, when we get to that question. Okay, the next question, when a prisoner is released, how do they re-enter the workforce? What kind of help is available to released prisoners?
Right now, there are several services to help people to reintegrate back into society. As I was saying earlier, we're trying to create another one here. Besides Second Chance, we're trying to create something called Fresh Start that we will be trying to implement on a quarterly basis, or to get it just up and running before we can try to launch it on an everyday one-stop shop for individuals that are coming home from not only prison, but from county jails, to be able to come and get their restoration of their voting rights, to be able to work with employers that we already work with that are felon friendly, to be able to get people, you know, their haircuts and things of that nature. So not only a Second Chance, but you have One Stop. And again, you know, employers now, especially here in Arizona, they're understanding that there's a tax credit when they hire a certain amount of felons. So that is something that they have been using to their benefit. But, you know, the main thing is housing. That's where your problematic area is. When you come home from prison, there are houses and apartments that will rent to you, but they're in the lower income areas where people don't want to go back to because that's where the crime is. So, you know, right now with the stimulus checks and unemployment being so rich, employers are having hard times of putting people to work. So right now, finding a job right now, it would be very, very beneficial for anyone that's looking for one, and especially if they pass the $15 minimum wage hike, which should be coming around here soon as well. So there are several places, I mean, programs in place. And again, like I say, a fresh start is something that we will be very, very eagerly starting here. Hopefully our first event will be in October, and we're scheduling to be at the TCC. We have judges and the prosecutors are open to work with us as well, in case, you know, someone that may come and has a warrant, that they can get their warrant squashed. We're trying to do everything that it is at our feasibility to just, you know, create and produce a whole individual, to give a person the best start that they can get to really get back on their feet and get their family together.
And I've always said this, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes that same village to come together to assist upon reentry. And, you know, the best chance for an individual to succeed is to get to have a culture shift. If a person has to be confined, which I'm against confinement for substance use disorders, you can't incarcerate that out of an individual, or mental health disorders. Those two right there, I think individuals would serve. It would be better to keep them in the community. But when you walk into the prison, you should be put on a path to succeed. You know, prison systems should reflect college campus or vocational campuses to put an individual, not break them down, put them in a mold, shake the box up and release them as to what society considers them to be rehabilitated. I think that when you do that assessment, when you come through Alhambra, that assessment should really see where that individual was. Were they a mechanic? Were they a welder? Were they, you know, where were they at in society? And then put them on a path to where you don't strip them down and have to reinvent the wheel or the individual. You enhance them. You help them overcome where they have stumbled, because every Friday I do an orientation for clients coming out under the transitional program. I don't see bad people there. I see people who may have levels of immaturity, who fail to embrace those next levels of responsibilities. And everybody runs from responsibilities. So now I want to talk about the reentry piece, because associated with that are traumas of confinement. You know, and when an individual is released, then they're kind of shoved back out. And there are good organizations that assist with the reentry factor, but there's not enough. There's not enough resources allocated on the community side. And I say this because recidivism is high, because who would want to put themselves out of business? If people stop going back to prison, you know, you look at Florence, which is a prison town, that's their economy. Mm-hmm. If people stop going back to prison,
putting the town out of business,
they start closing and they're out of business. Look at the growth of Pinal County, and then look at who is the top employer, or one of the top employers in that county. So I say this because the reentry factor it's really helping the individual when he first comes out, bring down that anxiety, because a lot of people have put together game plans, but those game plans do not match up with the realities of their reentry, because they might have a job waiting. However, they're still waiting on their ID, or their social security card wouldn't come. You know, the same thing with transportation. You know, the valley's spread out, and you could be far west, and then the employer says, hey, I got a good job for you. And then you got to go far east. And I say that because all of that becomes barriers. And then like Gerald said, housing, you know, it creates or gives an individual a low self-esteem, that here you are patching your life back together and patching relationships back together, but you don't even have your own housing. So all of those become barriers, but, you know, I'm very optimistic about the change in the culture, not systemically, but because of community is saying, you know what, this ain't right, enough is enough. And we actually created a village where we start mentoring individuals and get them connected to those resources, and shift their mind state from just having a game plan to survive to a game plan to live.
We had a chat question from Margaret McChesney about how do inmates know about the service opportunities, and how do we, is that improving? You know, are we getting more information to the incarcerated on things they can use when they get out?
And real quick, this is why we have other formerly incarcerated people. I've been sending information in. I got a gentleman coming in from Missouri. You know, he was connected to me through the Faith Network. You know, we are the village, but we're also responsible by not just getting information out, but getting accurate, real-time information out. And that's where, you know, that's gonna be on the community side. If an individual walks out of prison, it's no longer on the system. If a judge decides to divert or put a person in a diversion class, that's on the community to come together, change that concept of punishment and say, you know what, let me lift this person up and get them those resources. So, I mean, even this event tonight and what people are hearing, this is a platform where we can push out that accurate information, and they can stay connected to the organizations or get connected with me or Gerald or anybody on here. That's how you get that information out. And there's more people being released, with the number of about 19,000 people every year being released from the system. That is overwhelming for the number of reentry orgs, like I said, with minimal resources to take on that 19,000. So there are going to be people who might not get that information in a timely fashion, but they will eventually get that information.
Well, I know, and I actually had already answered this question in the chat, but I know, at least from Perryville's point of view, the women are given a packet. But what we found is that not all the information is accurate. It's not up to date. The contact information may not even be current anymore. And so, you know, that was a huge problem. And I certainly know from CAST services, UMOM, Justice Center, in other words, you know, Margaret is absolutely right in terms of people showing up to Andre House and they don't know. So there's a lot of work to be done in that. And to get the DOC to cooperate with us that, yes, this is important. And yes, you do need to keep these documents up to date. You know, that's what we have found on the women's side, is that it's a huge, huge challenge, which says a lot about whether they want people to succeed or whether they want people to return.
I
Thanks,
concur.
Khalil, because you're giving me, and I think our committees are a boost in that. Yeah, we are maybe helping get the community involved and informed. So thank you. So.
And another part of that is to hold DOC accountable for what they're doing. For example, in preparation for tonight, I was looking at some of the DOC policies, and one of the policies is, and we will help and make sure that an inmate, as they're getting ready to leave, to be released, that we'll have an up-to-date access card. Well, they don't do that all the time. You know, I was aware of a woman whose son was released and had severe medical problems and did not get an access card and ended up in a very tragic way. And it was brought to DOC's attention, and if they hadn't obviously complied with their own policies, and they realized, oh yeah, this is something we ought to be doing. So, you know, maybe they've started doing that better now. But you know, we also have to hold them accountable.
Definitely. A lot of, like you were saying, on the access side, some crimes will prevent the person from getting an access card. And one of the main things, like you were saying, we have to make sure that DOC is updated with all the halfway housing information, the job resources and things of that nature. But we are, like I keep reiterating, we're trying to really push something with Second Chance. We have probation and parole working with us. And we're going to make sure that we do a better job in making sure that people have updated information as far as upon their release, what is available for them and where to go. And that is one of the main things that we are working on right now to because when you're on probation and parole, like Khalil was saying, transportation is very hard. And you're limited sometimes, especially when you're on a bus. And if you're trying to track down your birth certificate, your social security card, trying to get a job, then you have to go over here. You may have to drop. Then you may have to go see your PO. You're going to have to see your PO once a week or maybe twice a month or whatever that is. All of that is hard. And a lot of things that we're trying to do, like the medical system with their integrated medical system, we're trying to have everything in one house to make it easier for the individual. Instead of having to jump around town to everything, you would just have to go from one door to the next. And it's just going to take us as a community, as Khalil was saying, to make sure that we have that information and we, reach people where they are and uplift the individual.
Friends, related to this question in our chat, Nancy Nonini asks, Inside Out program is trying to give incarcerated people online resources to have up-to-date information. Do you know if it is working yet?
Now, I'm and this is just me. I'm up and down about certain organizations that go in. I'm skeptical because is it about the empowerment of the individual, or you're dealing with the university system, or you're dealing with it's a class and it's more, you're getting students in to interact. And I say this because when I was there, you had leisure programs that really just occupied your time while you were incarcerated. But the key thing is empowerment. I don't know if, to me, a lot of these programs have been there, but the barriers still exist. You see what I'm saying? In any individual, just like Billy, we became good friends because your advocacy. Like how can you walk into a prison and see X, Y, and Z wrong, but then just walk out and not really advocate to bring those changes? No. And that's where I'm starting to see a lot of these programs who are just accepting the status quo, because it is unacceptable that a person walks out of there with an ID, like when they're getting out, or they have a barrier because and this is real time information. An individual is scheduled for release, but the CO3 comes 3 days before their release to try to do their access medical, and it's not going to kick in when they're on the street. So now you just put them in a twist, because when they get out, because there's an application submitted, now they have to wait 30 days or until that one is approved. And I kept having to explain that at that point, you might as well not do the application, because it's faster for an individual to get connected out here. So when it comes to these programs, they should be part of the solution of shifting the culture, instead of just saying, and I'm gonna be frank, I feel a lot of them kiss butt to get into prison, and they don't want to. They're afraid to advocate against all the things that are going wrong, which only hurts those individuals who are sitting in the system.
And from where I sit, I 100% agree, and as you know, and from where I sit, the programs are not vetted well enough at all. And their motivations beyond, getting in there and all the rest of it. So I just want this to be a real quick answer, because I know Paul's got more questions, or Bud has more questions for us. But Maria Haas, she said, aren't a high number of people in prison people with disabilities? Is that, maybe Paul, I don't know if you have the stats on that, but is that true? Is there a high number of people that have disabilities that are in prison in the prison population?
Well, there was a high number and I'm gonna say that's a loaded question only because what type of disabilities are we talking about? Because mental health disorders could be considered or is a disability. And they found I think it was like 70% of the population has some mental health disorder related, to them. So, and outside of that, the environment then turns around and creates disabilities. When you talk about the healthcare and learning disabilities, when she said learning disabilities, when you look at, I don't want to say learning disabilities because I dropped out of school, but I had advanced classes. I never graduated. I never had a learning disability, but I got my GED while I was incarcerated. I said, let me get this. And that's what I was going to say earlier too. When we talk about the qualifications of people in employment or vocational training, we're talking about some intelligent people, and most of them can articulate themselves. They're not dumb, but on paper, when you're talking about the programs, there's a priority ranking based on the nature of your crime and how closer you are to the gate, because there may be at any given time, probably 20 slots to get into an educational class to get your GED or something like that. So, and then they make that a program requirement in order for you to be released. So I don't want to say that people necessarily have learning disabilities. There are people who do have learning disabilities. I've seen that, but I don't think that's a systemic issue. I think overall the lack of adequate programming of even those individuals who have their GED, get them into programming that's going to enhance them or empower them. And that's what I talked about earlier.
And you alluded to the fact, the environment that they're in and the ever increasing rates of depression and, things like that, that then affect how they function in other areas, whether they're accepted into the limited number of classes, et cetera. Bud, what's our next question?
That kind of leads us into the next, what is the school to prison pipeline? Is there a disparity in school punishment based on economic status?
Let me real quickly answer the question that Billy posed a second ago. How many people are there with disabilities in prisons? And seems to be about 26% of state prisoners reported mobility, hearing, or visual disability. And if you add in folks with cognitive disabilities, including developmental disabilities, that rises to between 32 and 40% in prisons. So you do have a large segment of the prison population with some type of disability.
And to answer the school to prison pipeline, that is something that's very avid right now with juveniles. We see a lot of contact with school security, and with marijuana just becoming legal here, people are vaping more. So you have young children that are vaping more and committing all type of just things that they believe to be a misdemeanor, but it's something that's going to carry them into the system. Once you continue to create that contact with school security, and now they're being referred to juvenile court. And once they're referred to juvenile court, they are now in the system. And just with that, that first encounter will continue, as you said, to enhance. And the more the misdemeanors, the next time something's going to be a class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 felony, and there you go. They're off to the prison. I know that there are very, very is a thin line that people don't want to get rid of. Here in Tucson, we have a lot of TPD presence on a lot of our high schools because of the active juvenile crime rate going up. But we're trying to get their presence off of school grounds and get more peer support and things of that nature to be able to not refer them to the juvenile system, but defer them into something that will create a better way. That I know it's a fight in itself, because we live in a society and in a state that loves to just incarcerate people, and that is something that is an uphill battle. But the school to prison pipeline is very active. It is very, very aggressive on how they deal with juveniles right now.
And Gerald, I think you hit the two biggest issues right on the head that work together to increase the school to prison pipeline, which is zero tolerance policies. In other words, minor things that years ago would require a stern talking to now are referred to SROs. And so it's a combination of having police presence on campus and the zero tolerance policies, just really, really increases the amount of referrals into the system. It stays with them, and all of a sudden they're in a juvenile or the criminal system. And getting police off the campuses, think of different ways to deal with issues instead of referrals, the referrals, or having somebody banished from the school or suspended. All those things work together. By the way, in Tucson, you have somebody from the Tucson County Attorney's Office saying, or the Pima County Attorney's Office saying there is no school to prison pipeline in Tucson and Pima County. So for what that's worth,
I don't see how.
Yeah, you see it from a different perspective.
Definitely.
That officer on the school grounds and referring them to the law or the prison system is kind of fits into what we're hearing so much about prison or police, and learning how to de-escalate instead of go crazy.
Right. I have a friend, his name is Lance Meeks. He runs the need committee for the Goodwill, and he gets the juveniles that are referred from juvenile court that are still in high school, and they give them a list of those who are continuing to make police contact, in the city and throughout the school district. So it is something that is very, very much alive. And again, we are working with him and trying to make sure that we can, correct that and get police presence off of TUSD presence. And again, to just be able to bring the counselors back in to where, like when we were going to school, you would have a counselor. You get caught with a joint, you talk to a counselor. Nowadays, they call the police, and next thing you know, your name is in front of a juvenile judge.
Next question is, I've jumped one or two, but is the legislature working on criminal justice reform? What are they doing? Paul, you ought to be in on that, huh?
Well, it's one of those things. Every year, you start the legislative session with great hopes, and there are all kinds of bills that are proposed. And right about now, during the session, most of the bills are dead or never had any life to them to begin with, or they've been watered down so much that there's a little bit positive, but your great hopes have pretty much been diminished. And so we've seen that a lot this legislative session. We've seen and we've talked about this a little before, the bill that would increase the good day, or the credits for good time, that would increase that. The goal was to have those work retroactively as well as proactively. Well, I think the retroactive application has died, and The bill is still being worked, so we still have the prospective application of additional good time credits for nonviolent, drug-related type of crimes. So that may yet move across the finish line, but it's not what people were hoping for in terms of the
Retroactive part of it.
I'm sorry.
In terms of the retroactive part of it.
Yeah, right. In terms of retroactive, yeah, that's something that people are really hoping to get done. That's not going to happen. The transition program that's operated by Department of Corrections, there's been an extension of that, increase the eligibility a little bit. Yeah, I think people were looking towards that and hoping for more, but the fact that it's been extended, maybe expanded a little bit, that's all good. Not as good as it could have been. And then there are a couple of other bills that have actually passed last year, but were not signed before the legislature adjourned. And one of those bills includes prohibiting somebody who has been convicted of certain, drug-related nonviolent crimes, prohibiting that from being used as a way to stop them from getting certain licenses. So it's not a ban the box, but it really says, hey, you can't hold. This cannot be a basis for denying, certain types of licenses, that there have been these types of convictions. Billy, we're gonna
just friends that are in attendance this evening with us, as opposed to on YouTube. SB 1064. That is the bill we're referring to with regard to the earned release credit. That is the bill that is probably about the most active that's left. And if you want to contact Senator Mesnard and encourage him to get it on the floor for a vote, because that is not guaranteed if you know how the system works. But I'd really like to move to the private prison question, because we only have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, this getting things through the legislature comes down to money, and this is where we need to talk more about the private prison system and the people getting wealthy. So let's go ahead and ask, how does the private prison system work? Is it equitable for all?
Well, I think Khalil pretty well described how the private prison system works and where the where the money goes, and the fact that you've got private prisons, and about nearly 20% of Arizona prisoners are housed in private prisons. And as Khalil was saying, that the contracts are to ensure that they get paid for a particular percentage of beds filled, whether or not those beds are filled or not. So there's an incentive there. Certainly, they have the private prisons to keep those beds filled as much as possible, which means that they have an incentive not to allow sentencing reform, decriminalization of drug crimes, of marijuana, because fewer beds, fewer crime. They have potential to lose money. So that's where the real leverage is, and the real incentives are for the private prison system. There's also a lawsuit in Arizona, a federal lawsuit that was filed against the state of Arizona to have private prisons declared unconstitutional, because the allegation is that they're essentially engaged in slavery, which is unconstitutional. That lawsuit is still active. We'll see what happens with that. And the attorneys who are running that lawsuit are also intending to be able to file similar lawsuits in other states as well. So that's something we need to follow.
To any of our panelists, any and all, at 7:20, Yvonne Harrison did post, what about private prisons having quotas for bed fill rates, that if there are not enough heads and beds, now this is what I found interesting, what she wrote, certain zip codes are targeted to find folks to fill those beds. What about that zip code piece?
I haven't heard that. I would love to. We know, and this is just what we do know, certain communities are over police. And when you allocate, policing or over police certain communities, there's going to increase your contact with with law enforcement. You know, it's increasing your chances of interacting with law enforcement. Now, once they pull you over, violate your rights, and if they don't find anything, some of those officers then look for something, even if you get a ticket or, hey, you know, now you got a warrant or whatever it is. But the dangers in that is they're going to get paid. Like the private prisons have a built-in clause where they're going to get paid 90% occupancy rate regardless. It doesn't, you know, and that's where the dangers of it, because this goes on for 20 years. So I haven't heard that certain zip codes are being targeted by the private prisons. However, over policing, which leads to people going to prison, plays into it too. And you know, the bigger thing with that is we have to really stress the fact that there's a conflict of interest when you allow people to profit off of what you consider a justice system. That's just period, whether it's private, state, or anything like that. And before we leave here, we have some ask and how people can get involved. So
before we get to that, because that really should probably be the next thing we do, Bud, but I'm just wondering, what do you know about private prisons in Nevada, since that's part of our conference geographic location?
You said in Nevada? Well, they operate. I don't know the incarceration rate of Nevada or anything like that, but what I feared, because California governor announced that he would no longer and I'm assuming once these contracts end with private prisons, they're not going to operate in the state of California. But, you know, that creates a bigger danger for us if we don't get a governor who has the guts to say, hey, you're not coming here. Because all they're going to do is say, hey, well, Arizona's next door, and it's still cheaper for them to transport people from neighboring states. Also, Nevada, who still has that culture of punishment, you know, I don't know how many facilities they have there, but I do see it as a breeding ground that would be receptive to those private prisons coming there in the West, you know, between Arizona and Nevada.
Okay, so I guess we need to get to the last question, and that is, what can be done about the economic inequality in the criminal justice system? And we'll let each panelist kind of do a wrap up, spill your guts.
You know, what can be done? I really feel the climate of the country right now is taking steps to decriminalize and decarcerate, working with Jay Lusa and you know, a lot of the reform agencies around the country. We're looking at ways to have alternative to incarceration programs, and that's what HEAT is. That's what we're trying to make sure we're able to give the prosecutors and the state other obligations, or I mean, not obligations, but opportunities on avenues to, instead of sending a person to prison, to give them the programming that they need. And with more of those type of programs and community faith-based programs and housing and things of that nature, and everyone coming together and really working as a village and fighting and advocating, that we're really not doing anything by, you know, putting a person in prison, especially if they have a mental health issue or an addiction issue. That in itself will create jobs, not only, but it will also keep the person that was going to prison with their family. You know, like you said, when you split the parents up, you're taking 9 times out of 10 it's the male, and he's the breadwinner. And when you put that on the family, that trickles all the way down from the mother either having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make sure the ends are meeting, and she's not being able to be at home with her children. So there are things that, you know, we can do and that we are taking steps to do as of right now. And like I say, the alternative to incarceration programs, and just creating better opportunities, and looking at what we're really using our prison system for, and is it beneficial to put a person in a program, or is it beneficial to put a person on the taxpayer's dollar in prison? And you know, as we all know, that it is more helpful to get a person help, and where they can continue to benefit not only for their family but to society. So that's where I stand with more alternative to incarceration programs that are not only here in Arizona but are opening up around the country.
And I agree with everything Gerald just said, and I really like the emphasis on keeping people out of prison, you know, at the front end, because that's, I mean, there are really, you know, kind of three sections of somebody's time with the system. One is the front end, and you know, a couple of the things we talked about tonight that maybe we can work on as well. One is the school to prison pipeline, and we've already come up with some, you know, what are the issues, some of the issues, and people you know, are trying to get police off of campus, and you know, get rid of kind of the automatic referral to SRO or to suspension, to kind of stop, or at least slow down that school to prison pipeline, keeping them away from that very first contact with the system. I think another front end issue that we didn't spend much time talking about, but I think we need to spend time dealing with, is bail reform. When people are arrested and they're in jail and bail is set, and if they can't make that bail for whatever reason, if there is a bail, first of all, you know, most crimes should not have bail. And I think that's something we can work towards eliminating. And if there is bail, you know, if you can't pay that bail, then you're in the system, and all kinds of different pressures are on you to you plead guilty, and you know, the longer you're in jail, being held on bail, you know, the more things you lose on the outside: jobs, housing, connections with family. So you know, dealing with bail reform, I think, is just critical. And then the last part of someone's history with the system is on release. And it's like, and we've talked about the resources that just need to be there and increased for people when they're released, with housing, jobs, identification, healthcare, all those things that have to be in place immediately, or you know, or the risks just accelerate for being rearrested for recidivism. And you know, if we can stop those, you know, at the gate of the prison by having good programs and resources, I think that would be huge. So those are some of my ideas.
So Khalil, you're unfortunately stuck with just a couple of minutes. So
it's all I need. So when you think of what needs to happen to change the economic inequality in the states, we have to elect officials that are willing to embrace a culture change. So we can move away from this false narrative that having a culture change is going to jeopardize public safety. When you stick to the status quo, you actually create more marginalized communities, and then most people give up hope. And that hope then leads to despair. And people say, they wake up, nobody should wake up and feel like, well, what do I have to lose? You know, and then when we look at these inequalities, where most people are saying, hey, I'm going to take a vacation to Europe or Disney World, a lot of these individuals are just saying, you know what, I'm trying to get up out of the hood. Like, we have to understand the shift that has to come through leadership, and leadership sets the tone. We have an attorney general's race coming up, and we have a gubernatorial race coming up. That's probably going to be the most important race for the state of Arizona when we talk about pivoting from the culture of punishment or that get tough on crime mentality to a more restorative or transformative model of reform or justice. So I would tell people to pay attention to these candidates, scrutinize their plans, ask questions, get with me. I'm at the ACLU AZ, I'm at AZ Faith Network, and we want to train and develop people to empower them to get on this front line and help shift this culture. I want to thank you for inviting me here today, and that's all I have to say.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Well, everyone, it's been a wonderful evening. I do want to thank so much Gerald Williams, Khalil Rushdan, and Paul Bullis for being our panelists. I want to thank Bud Clark for being our moderator this evening. That was wonderful. As your Director of Outreach and Justice for the conference, as well as President of the Arizona Faith Network, we are all looking at this issue and we need your help. So, again, contact Mesnard. My email is in the chat, as is Khalil's, and we want to hear from you. If you would like to join the Economic Inequality team or the prison reform team that Paul Bullis heads, we would be happy to have you. Just contact me through email, again, bfidlin@dscumc.org, and we will be happy to put you on any one of these teams. We would love to have you. The Arizona Faith Network would also love to have you. We have a social justice commission that is looking at this as their main focus, and so we would absolutely love to have you. The other thing, again, I would do, there's Gerald's email in the chat, by the way. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is go to the conference website. We put it in the chat, but it's dscumc.org. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you will see the search box. You can type in economic inequality. You can type in prison reform. You can type in, church and society, whatever you want to do. And that's how you will get to a variety of articles as well as events. Bud had mentioned earlier about all the events that this team has put on. They all have been very strong, so you can view those, and please share them with your friends. This is important work. The injustices that are happening because of economic inequality in this country are widespread. They affect every single area, from education to such things as criminal justice reform. We need you. Thank you so much for your gift of time tonight, and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.